Hello and welcome to Faith Backstage, where we are having backstage conversations about faith, life, and ministry. I'm your host, Joey, and I am joined today by the lead pastor of Restore to LA, Brad Sarian. Brad, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joey. Fun to be on.
I am so excited to have you. When I was first dreaming up this podcast idea, you were one of the first people that I thought of that I would just have a blast having a conversation with. We obviously go way back. We've known each other for a long time. You were talking about how you probably first met me when I was like in 6th grade.
I think so.
When I was still a child.
Yep.
But we haven't seen each other in like 10 years, which is wild. You left a really big impact on me. You were the first person to get me excited about my favorite book of the Bible, which is Ecclesiastes.
Sweet.
You taught a series called Vanity. Do you remember that series in high school?
I do, man. That was one of the... I've thought of that series often, as I think we went verse by verse through it in Ecclesiastes. And it just, I think the first few weeks were awesome, and then after that I was like, we're in some deep waters. So,
it got me excited. That is my favorite book of the Bible now, and that was kind of my first time being introduced to it. So I want to start just by kind of like getting to know your background, kind of your personal history. So where did you grow up, first of all?
Yeah, so I'm from the Valley, man. Born and raised in Chatsworth, and so kind of was a Valley kid in a sense. I did go to like private Christian school growing up. So but born and raised in the Valley. Went to Canoga Park Lutheran. The school doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
But yeah, was kind of born and raised here in the Valley.
Nice. And what kind of faith were you raised with?
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting blend. Maybe it wasn't too interesting, unfortunately. It was very common in America of, I think my parents did the best they could with what they knew. And but we went to a Lutheran church every Sunday. And my experience of that church specifically was obviously you're taught that God exists. You're taught something about Jesus. And then I think like the real emphasis that I took away was just, don't be bad so that you don't go to hell. Yeah. And so I that's what I heard growing up. That's what I thought. I hated church, to be honest. I remember just trying to sleep in every Sunday morning or faking it as a kid just so we didn't have to go. And so, now it's sad looking back on those being my earliest memories, but just really excited. Once that last hymnal was sung, it was just like freedom. Like I just remember I would sing out the last one because I was so excited the Sunday was going to be over. So.
Yeah, what was like the worship and teaching style at that church? What did it look and feel like?
Yeah, it was definitely more traditional, which is cool. There's bits and pieces of it that's absolutely beautiful. My wife actually grew up in another Lutheran church in the Valley, and theirs was far more contemporary. So it's so funny. We both grew up in like the Lutheran tradition, but very different. Like I had never heard of like Christian, like the Hillsong, that crew. I didn't hear until I started going to Rocky Peak. I just knew of hymnals, and we didn't go to like any type of camps or anything like that. So I was an acolyte, like a kind of an altar boy who put the candles out in my white robe some Sundays. So
so it
was definitely more of the traditional vibe, kneeling and hymnals and so it was definitely a little different than what we're currently doing right now. I think some of it's beautiful and should be brought back into the church. Maybe we got a little too far away from tradition, but that definitely it was not growing up in that, being a young child who cared nothing for it. It was unfortunate to say the best.
Yeah. And what was your experience like walking into the church at Rocky Peak, which is a super contemporary church, for the first time? What did that feel like?
Yep. Yeah, no, it was so different. And I ended up going to another mega church right before I went to Rocky Peak in high school. And so that was kind of my first experience of mega church world. And then coming to Rocky Peak I was a sophomore or junior in high school. The music was like exciting. It was like, whoa, this is so different from what I was used to. And I think the thing that really stood out to me about Rocky Peak was just the relationships. That was so unique, that there were pastors and leaders who looked at me as a high school student and didn't say like, oh, you didn't view me as just like I don't know, a lesser than, but really like developed relationships with me and cared about me as a person. And that was just unique. That was so mind blowing. I remember like feeling just loved and really cared for. And so, yeah, that was such a beautiful gift.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm sure you accepted Christ in some way at a pretty young age when you were involved in the Lutheran church. But was there another time in life when your faith kind of became real for you and you kind of made like a rededication or like redecided to commit your life to Christ?
Yeah, man, my story it's definitely a weird one. I don't even know if we've actually chatted through this kind of stuff, but I really don't believe I got saved until I was 20 years old. And so
okay.
I the weird thing is I started preaching at 18, and so there is a weird element to my story that doesn't make sense to a lot of people, especially just from the outside experience of me, because I wasn't some crazy heretic preaching some false thing, but I think what I found was that growing up in a religious environment of primarily in the more traditional church that was focused on be good, do good, stay away from bad stuff, I really found a lot of my identity in that stuff. It was really a self-righteousness that was fostered in my heart that I clung to and really ran with. And so I was convinced that at the end of the day, God and I were good based on my obedience. I stayed away from all the stuff that, stay away from porn, drugs, and all the shady stuff and go to church on Sunday. And I did those things. And so in my mind, it was like, if anyone's going to be good with God, it's got to be me. And so even though I may not have articulated that, internally, that was absolutely where I stood with God. My faith was not in Jesus. My faith was ultimately in myself. And so, I got saved at 20 after 2 years of preaching and leading. And it wasn't until a couple of guys kind of really began sharing the gospel with me in a way that I heard it. It's not that it was the first time anyone had preached the gospel. I'm sure I heard it a billion times before. But we know that God works differently. The Spirit of God had to open my eyes, and He did. And so it's not anyone's blame. Like, how could this have happened? It's like, no, I just wasn't listening. And ultimately, it was my arrogant, self-righteous, prideful heart, very similar to the Pharisees, that Jesus had a difficult time with. It's like your lips proclaim me, your mouth is close to me, but your heart's far from me. And so I think when I look at my story, I see myself so much as a Pharisee, raised in the church, trusting in my obedience, trusting in my own righteousness, and not knowing Christ. And so at 20, when I heard the gospel for the first time to my particular situation, that God isn't going to love me any more or less based on my obedience, but based on the finished work of Jesus, like a light bulb went off. And it was the first time I was ever excited about Jesus. I mean, it was literally like, this is why people think He's awesome. I thought He was a good help on bad days, which I rarely had back then, and I thought. But yeah, man, it was the gospel coming to life in my life, in my soul, and really grasping like, whoa, what I had been doing was just teaching the Bible as morals, and just not just, hey, don't gossip, hey, don't lie, don't steal, which there's Bible verses all about those things. But I missed the heart of Christ in all those things, that those things outside of His love and His grace, man, it's similar to what Paul calls, it's the law of the ministry of death and condemnation. Like no one can get saved through the law, but only through Christ. And so I think at 20 got saved, and so that was a weird experience, very exciting experience, but definitely weird having my history of being in the church. And it's funny, I meet people all the time now that have very similar stories. So I think I used to imagine myself as this unique person, but unfortunately, I think it's so easy for us in the American Christianized-ish world. You just think, like, of course I'm a Christian because I go to church and I do these things, And so, at 20, it was a game changer for me.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious to hear, like, to what extent was your faith, or was your religion, I guess is more the word I should use, like reflected in your home life? Was church the kind of thing you like put in a box after you were done with it on Sundays, or were your parents kind of living that out in a real way?
Yeah, no, there was not much of a connection to everyday life. It was very much Sunday for an hour and a half, and then so I never saw that. What does it look like to follow Jesus in a normal day-to-day setting. It was just churches over here, and then we do everything on the side, you know. And I think that's even when I was leading, 18, 19 years old, it wasn't like I was living this crazy, like, false double life where it was shady on the side. It was like I was self-deceived. I was convinced I was a Christian. It makes sense why other people thought I was a Christian. You know, it wasn't like I was hiding secrets. No one can search my soul. I couldn't even search my own soul. You know, and so there was just this piece of, I remember there were just times, even at Rocky Peak, where the music would be playing, and it was like my third service of the day because it was just ministry was everything. And I just was so over it. Like, there was just nothing in my soul that wanted to worship Jesus. And I thought that was normal. And I built so much of my identity on Bible knowledge and that stuff. So I'd walk up to my office and go read the Bible because I didn't have anything to worship. I was just like, all right, like, cool, God, we're good. Let me go learn about you. You know, and obviously Bible is important, but I think that those types of things should have been as like red flags, like, not to say you can just sing 24/7 and not get tired, but like, there was just rarely ever desire in my heart to really praise him and worship him and thank him. It's like, because I wasn't saved. I really felt like I had met God 95% of the way, you know, so I can sing a good chorus, just thank you. But ultimately, when he saved me, it was like, whoa, like, I actually could sing and get excited about you forever. And so, so that was definitely a lack in my early childhood years that probably formed me quite a bit in high school and college.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So you talked about how you started preaching basically at 18. So I'm curious to hear kind of what was your first time serving? Obviously, you said as a kid you were serving in your church, but moving to Rocky Peak, like, what was your first time serving looking like, and how did you get to the place where you were preaching at 18?
Yeah. So at Rocky Peak, they would do, I don't know if they still do it, but it was like, I think called Senior Sunday of some sort.
Yep.
Okay, sweet.
We changed it to Senior Saturday because we moved the service to Saturday, but
there you go.
Same
I
thing.
love it. Yeah, no, so I was a senior in high school, and I was kind of viewed as a leader in the senior class. And for the sermon, the high school pastor at the time asked myself and my buddy Nick Ranieri to co-preach a sermon. And so, I mean, I may have been 17 or 18, you know, graduating high school. And I co-preached a sermon. And I mean, looking back on it, I'm sure it was just an utter train wreck, but God is very kind. And so I preached that. And then it was the junior high pastor who heard about the sermon and just... I didn't know him, but he said, like, hey, have you ever been interested in junior high ministry? And quite frankly, my heart answer was no, thank you. But I was interested kind of about ministry, and so I ended up saying yes, and I got hired in as a junior high intern at 18, and started preaching like every 6 weeks or something like that, leading a small group, and you know, that's where I met you back in the day at 10 or 11 or whatever it was. And so, yeah, man, that was definitely my first experience in kind of paid vocational ministry, pastoral, whatever it was. But yeah, it was...
Yeah, for me at that age, I mean, you guys, like the college age, like intern staff at Wildlife, you guys were just like celebrities. I referenced in my first email to you about Dang T-Rex. It was some kind of song that you guys did. Probably means more to me than it does even to you, because I still will be like going through my day and it'll like pop into my head somehow.
Oh man.
So
yeah, no, there's definitely some videos out there on YouTube that are absolutely embarrassing, and I wish I knew who owned those YouTube videos so we could take them down, but they seem to be stuck on the internet forever.
I'm sure there's a hard drive sitting around here somewhere with something with all of those videos.
I'm sure. So yeah, hopefully it won't be used against me.
I'll resist the temptation to drop the audio of it into the episode right here.
Thank you.
So did you see yourself kind of being a pastor at a young age? Like, when did you kind of like realize that was something that you wanted to do, that you were like aspiring to?
I definitely didn't want to growing up. You know, when my experience in the church was. It just was so boring, you know? And so I actually have a really clear memory of being like 7 or 8 years old. And the pastor of the church I was at in Canoga Park, he introduced me to some like college-aged guy, and he said, this young man is going to become a pastor one day. And I mean, I was young, like 7 or 8, and my first thought was like, what a waste, man. Like, well, don't do it. It sounds like the worst thing you could possibly imagine to do. So, it wasn't, I think that, God's so sovereign. It's so hard to piece together my story. I wish it was this clear. I didn't know him, and then I got saved, and then he called me into ministry or whatever that is. But it just didn't work that way for me. I honestly have prayer journals where I have like a question mark next to ministry when I was like 18 years old, and so I think he, in his sovereign grace, called me, if you will, to ministry before he even saved me, and he knew what he was going to do. But it wasn't until 20 years old when I started grasping the gospel and Jesus saved me that I was like, okay, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like I think I was on a track for burnout, even just after 2 years of ministry, not knowing Jesus. It's like there's the excitement of, I was definitely applauded and patted on the back, and so there's that piece, man, where your identity is wrapped up in what other people think of you. Ministry works, I think sometimes we can pretend that this isn't a place where you can build a platform and get, the accolades from a society and community. It's like, yeah, you can do that. And so, but I don't think it'll last very long. It'll crush you eventually. But at 20, when Jesus' love and his grace became just fresh to me and beautiful to me, I was like, oh, I can preach this and lead with this for the rest of my life. And so at 20, my shift of kind of like, build an identity for yourself in ministry and tell people about Jesus kind of shifted to tell people about Jesus, and whether or not who knows what the outcome will be, but this is what he's inviting me into, and it was a privilege to join.
That's awesome. Yeah, so you referenced the experience of doing ministry, being super involved in a church, and like doing 3 services a day, and kind of just having it be your whole life, and kind of the boredom and the lack of excitement in that. But I'm curious to hear, because I think there can be monotony, especially if you're doing multiple services and you're doing the same thing week in, week out. And though there may be like a true joy and a true love and a true excitement, you might not be feeling that at all time. So I'm just curious to hear you kind of talk about like the balance between those two things. Yeah,
It is, and I don't ever want to pretend like, we right before COVID, our church had moved to 2 gatherings, and it was the first time we had begun just feeling that ourselves of, you preach a sermon and just exhausted, and then you're like, uh-oh, here we go again. And I think the key to it is just honesty. I think it's not playing the game of hype and, let's pretend and make this exactly like it was last time. We would have a prayer meeting in between those 2 gatherings. And most of the time, the prayer was simply, Jesus, help me. Like, help me. Like, you did some beautiful stuff last hour. Would you help my heart be here? Would you help me be present? Would you help me care about these people as much as I cared about the people before? And so I think there's just that brutal honesty with God and with people, to be able to just sit there and just go, yeah, I'm a human, man. I don't think that I can preach 9 times. I mean, some of these guys are preaching 9 Sundays, 9 services. I'm like, good Lord, man. I don't know how that's physically possible. But let's just be honest with the difficulty, like you're saying. Yeah, sometimes it is monotonous. And so let's acknowledge that and just pray our faces off that he would just be real to us every moment as we're preaching, as we're singing, as we're welcoming and loving people. So yeah, I think honesty and that vulnerability piece is just really crucial.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd love to hear about just the journey to launching Restored LA, kind of when that started, how that, like the seed of that vision, and God kind of planting that in you. I've certainly heard a lot about it. Regretfully, I've never had a chance to visit, but it's always been on my radar, and it's always been a desire of mine. So someday I will. But I just would love to hear kind of the journey of launching that church.
Yeah, bro. So when my wife Sarah and I, we got married almost 10 years ago now. And we ended up joining our good friends Andy and Jackie Rogers. They were wanting to plant a church in San Diego, and so we ended up praying and feeling called to join them. And that was about 8.5 years ago or whatever. And so we joined them, and he planted the first restored church. And he has like just a deep passion for the kingdom advancing through church planting. And church planting was new to me. I honestly, we didn't know much about it. Yeah, I'd spent the most of my ministry experience in the mega church world at that point. And church planting just felt odd. The first time I heard about it, I was like, we got enough churches, we're fine, And Andy was just a crucial voice along with some other friends, Chris and Meryl Vinand, and just helping us see that, that there are some big churches, and praise God for those big churches, but we need more, until everyone knows Jesus, right? We need church families that are healthy and advancing the kingdom. And so we joined them about 8 or so years ago down in San Diego. I came on staff as a pastor with him, and we had both of our kids down there. And really, our game plan was to just live and die in San Diego. We had no plans of ever coming back to the Valley. It was just we found ourselves a amazing little house in San Diego and loved the church family. It became our family. And so we were kind of planning on just, hey, this is us. We're going to die here, and good luck everybody in the Valley family. We'll see you when we can. But we're here. You come to us. We're not coming up to you anymore. Yeah. You come to us. And then it was after about 3.5 years there, it was just, Jesus. I was spending some time in the Word and reading through the New Testament. We got to Revelation, got to a passage in Revelation 6 on just that final day that people are going to be desiring the mountains to fall on them and hide rather than see Jesus. And to this day, it was the clearest vision I've ever had of friends and family members I know in the Valley that don't know Jesus, and I felt just a very clear call that we're supposed to go up and plant a church and proclaim the gospel. And so that was pretty trippy. I mean, I was just crying because I didn't want to leave San Diego, and then two, just kind of crying like, what's this going to look like? And so Sarah and I I was nervous to tell her. I was like, oh, this isn't going to go well. And we just had 2 babies. I mean, we're like just planting our roots down. And we had date night that night. We do date nights on Thursdays, and I said, hey, can we just stay in tonight and just pray and ask Jesus what he has? Because here's what I think, and but I'm open to I want to be wrong, and she was like, she said, I want you to be wrong too, and we spent an hour or two just in prayer and in worship, and by the end of those 2 hours, it went from like a please know Jesus, we'll do it if we have to we can't wait. Like we want to get back up to the Valley and start a church and just see men and women come to know him. And so we brought it to the eldership team and friends down there in the church, and they ended up saying, yep, let's just wait on like the win, and about 6 months later, I felt like Jesus was like, now. So we told my friends and eldership team, and they were like, yep, let's go. So they sent us out, and so we've been back up in the Valley for about 5 years, and it's been fun, man. It's been a wild journey, but it's been just such a joy. It's crazy. Like Northridge now feels like home. The first year or two, it was rough adjusted, but now we love being here and just see ourselves here for quite a while. So.
Yeah, for sure. So what does your relationship look like? Because I was kind of like looking around your website, seeing what your values and vision are and whatnot. And I noticed that there are several restored churches that are part of like the family. Yeah. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit about how you guys seek vision from God, how vision is cast, how decisions are made, and kind of how you determine your values and like what the future is going to look like. Yeah,
no, that's great. So we are technically autonomous churches, meaning that we are individual. There's no hierarchy of government type for the family of churches, but we are relationally bound. We are good friends who love each other deeply and really respect one another. And so we tried our best to find a beautiful balance of, there isn't technically like legalities holding us in accountability, but really friendship and trusting in Jesus with one another and submission to one another. Yeah. So, the lead guys are generally some of my closest friends, and we're on text threads every single day and just able to, we're going to be Zooming next week. We Zoom once a month, just kind of get on the same page, hear from each other, share our hearts, what God's doing. And so, yeah, it's heavily relational. We had, like a retreat this 4 or 5 months ago where all the lead, all the elders and wives all came together for a house in Palm Springs. We just hung out. Like, there was just very little plan other than let's just spend time together. So deeply relational. And we know each other all. It's not just a bunch of guys who got like hired into something, but when we helped Andy and Jackie with Restored San Diego, we were there for a while, and then we helped another couple in the church go plant another church down in San Diego that was Restored South Bay, and then we were Restored LA up here, and then out of Restored Uptown planted another in Restored Temecula, and we're also have Harbor City in South Africa, just very, very close friends of ours in South Africa, and then some missionary couples across the world. So, so it's just kind of relationally bound, but we're autonomous. So we generally just kind of check in on each other more of like, hey, I'm thinking this. What do you guys feel? As opposed to, can I have permission? But really a submission. Like I'll be honest. I was actually this past Sunday, I was gonna talk. Yeah, it's a long story, but basically I ended up texting. I texted the lead guys, and I just said, hey, here's what I'm thinking, yes or no. And they all shot it down, and I submitted to them, not because of I had to. I'm the lead pastor in this local church, and I'm able to, make decisions like that. But I trust them. Like, I actually, if all of them are going to be on the same page of saying no, don't do that. I don't want to be a fool and run by myself and just say, all right, I'm still right. I still see it this way. So so relational, autonomous, but then really just interdependent on one another's giftings. We really believe deeply in Ephesians 4:11 gifts, that there are gifts that Jesus has given to the church, that none of us have all of them, and we need one another to see a healthy, mature church. And so the guys and gals who are leaders in each one of the communities have been gifted in just such unique and powerful ways that I'd be a fool not to want them into my church family to help equip the saints in our church family. No matter what kind of gifts Jesus has given me, he hasn't given me everything. And my job is not just to impart my one gift to the church family that I lead, but ultimately to see them built up into the maturity and image of Jesus. And that demands all the gifts. And so we run to one another for trainings and teachings and just, equipping of how our people can grow in the prophetic giftings and in just the apostolic heart for the nations and in the evangelistic gift of sharing the gospel and all that good stuff. So yeah, it's a gift to be a part of a family of churches like that.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Yeah. So much like you, 10 years ago, I have never been involved in planning a house church. I don't know what that looks like or means. And so what I'd really like to hear, and some people might find this boring, but I'm just fascinated by it, is logistically, how do you set out about planning a church? What kind of resources do you need to get in place? What kind of people do you need to get in place? And what is that first, what goes into making that first weekend happen?
Yeah, no, that's good, man. So what we try to do is one, we want to view the church ultimately as a family, not as an event. And so when we're planting churches, we really want to make sure that we're not planting services. I think anyone can plant a service or an event, but that's not the commission that we see in Acts ultimately. It's to plant healthy families. And so in that sense, you don't need much. You just need a couple of people who want to follow Jesus. And so for us, the way our story, and our story is different from everybody else's, and similar. We borrowed from as many people as we could to learn. We didn't do this thing on our own, but really for us, when we were in San Diego and then moved up here. One, again, we're submitted to the eldership team. We think churches should plant churches, not just random people just, declare their independence and plant. So we were sent out of Restored Uptown. What that means to be sent out is one, relationally, that they're committed to us, right? So they're down to help us no matter what we need, and committed financially. They sent us $40,000 just to kind of get the ball rolling before, that we would begin fundraising and all that kind of stuff. But our ultimate desire was to plant a healthy church family. And so when we came back up to the valley, 3 people from San Diego moved up with us. By God's grace, they weren't just three random people. There were three of the best leaders San Diego had, and so we kind of stole them and prayed that Jesus would give them to us. And so that was such a gift to be able to have them join us and just really have them help us in laying a foundation. And ultimately, it came down to giftings. Like Sarah and I knew we don't have all the gifts, so we're not going to pretend to plant a church based on just our gifts. And so one of the couples, Paul and Nicole, just gifted shepherds and so gifted in hospitality and helped lay a foundation of what it looks like to be a church that is rooted relationally and in the home. And so yeah, I mean, we came up here and, we knew people because this is both where Sarah and I grew up. And so, we had some idea of a few people that might want to join the original team, but we weren't looking for like a specific number, but we ended up with like 25 people kind of in our living room, casting vision. Here's what we're planning on doing. Here's what we're looking at. And I mean, it was a wild crew. I mean, half the people weren't saved, and the other half weren't sure where they were at. And so it definitely wasn't the most glamorous, especially being a part of such a healthy church in San Diego. It was like, oh man, like maybe we should go back. Like this is going to be hard. And so, we started doing meetings on Wednesday nights, kind of our gospel communities, and then Sunday mornings in our backyard. I guess we were the pre-COVID. We saw it coming, but we were doing backyard gatherings, and just kind of hanging out. I mean, it was definitely not sexy, but it was beautiful to watch Jesus just start saving people. That I think I had this vision that Jesus was going to start saving a ton of friends and family that I knew. And unfortunately, that hasn't really been the case. But he saved so many other people that we never knew, and it was like, okay, this is why he called us back. And so to see some of those men and women who got saved in our church family now leading in our church is just like such a gift and such a beautiful reminder of Jesus' calling to us. So started in small groups and homes. And then we had like kind of a launch Sunday, if you will, just like, hey, we're officially going to be public. People were like, hey, can I invite my friends and coworkers and stuff? And we're like, just wait until this one Sunday. And so, we started renting a building, and then that's when we kind of did like our official launch, if you will. But we weren't launching to kind of get like, hey, now we're going to officially become a church. At that point, we were 6 to 8 months old and going, hey, we're actually welcoming you into the church. That this service is a gift. We love Sunday gatherings, but the church is far more than just a Sunday. So our desire is to be planting those healthy church communities, and then services and gatherings all flow from that.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the words like sent out, like you were being sent out from the church in San Diego, and it just feels so reminiscent of the early church and kind of like what God's vision for the church was. And I love the way it sounded. It really sounds like the way it's supposed to be done. Yeah. I'm curious to hear, do you ever struggle with like the success of Restored LA feeling like a reflection of you? And how either hard you're working or how good of a speaker you are or whatever. Not that this should be our heart, but we're fallen people. Do you ever have a hard time separating those things and just like allowing God to have the glory no matter what?
Absolutely. It's funny. It's a both and of. I also see all the ugliness more clearly than anybody else, and so there is a piece that if all I ever saw was, positive press out there, then sure, I think that would be maybe a little bit more difficult. But because we are a church family, like I mean, it's messy, and so there's for every one beautiful story, there's two rough stories, and obviously we might lead on Sundays and share the one positive story, and celebrate God's grace in that. There's definitely tears and heartache and pain and hard, awkward conversations in between all those things that really do. Yeah. They keep you humble. They keep you dependent on Jesus. We're just like, this is his church that he's building. We're going to praise him for the salvations. We're going to praise him for the fruit. But there's plenty of pain and sin in the mix of it all. One, in the local church, and two, in my own soul. That's just like, like it's part of the reason I'm not on social media and I don't have, my own website, and just because it's such a temptation for me already. And so that's the piece that, I think that I would never make a rule for other people because we all have different tendencies and different temptations. And for me, that is the desire to build a name for myself is so ugly. And Jesus has revealed that to me, that I've just been convicted that this is something I'm not going to do. If he wants to do something, cool, I'm down. But I'm not going to be the one forcing it. And so so I definitely need to be constantly reminded of the cross. There's just no pride when we're looking at the crucified King who had to die for me. I can't boast about anything we've done. And I'll tell you this too: the fact that we're a part of a church family, or a family of churches, is also just wildly humbling. That it doesn't feel like any success that we've experienced, if you will, or fruit or whatever it is. I just look back at brothers and sisters whose shoulders we stood on. All we didn't discover any. Like, we're not on this like new adventure where Brad is just figuring things out by himself. It's like, man, we've seen it modeled to us by so many faithful brothers and sisters before us, and so that kind of success that we could easily turn to pride, just constantly need to be repenting of and just going, thank you, Jesus, for the grace you've had over us. But definitely a daily fight. That is not something that like, oh, I used to struggle with stuff like that. It's like, man, I think that's Satan's just one of his biggest traps for leaders, and I know that's a weakness of mine, and so definitely need to be aware of it constantly.
Sure. Yeah. So what are just some of the core basic values of Restored LA, the things that you as a church that you feel God has put on your heart to model and to be for the people in your community?
Yeah, we have 6 core values as a church that we bleed, hopefully, that really are who we are. And I think this season of COVID has been really a testing ground of true values, and it's been, we've seen some shine brighter than others, and others that have, kind of struggled. But our first one is gospel. We are a church that just wants to be continually proclaiming the good news of who Jesus is and what he's done. And so we don't ever want to just assume that. We don't ever want to pretend like, oh yeah, people get that. That's why we're here. It's like, no, the gospel is why we're here, and what Christ has done for us. And so that's the foundation of everything we do. It's the foundation of our gatherings. It's the foundation of our gospel communities, the foundation of why we plant churches. All of it comes back to Jesus and his grace for us, his love for us. And so, so gospel is one. Family. A church as a family is huge for us. We don't believe, as I said earlier, the church is an event or an organization, but really the family of God. And so we don't just say that, we actually want to live that way. And that's, why a lot, if not most of the people in our church have people living with them from the church. It's just like we do. We have a friend who, is a part of the church family. She got saved into our church a year and a half or so ago, and she lives with us. And we're brothers and sisters. Jesus said that whoever does the will of God is my brother and my sister. And so we believe that deeply. We want to live that out as a family. Dependence is our third value, and just that we're utterly dependent on Spirit. Jesus said in John 15 that apart from me, you can do nothing. And so we want to live that out. We want to constantly be aware of our utter dependence on him in prayer and seeking him. And then fourth is mission, which is just our desire to fulfill what Jesus has commanded us in Matthew 28, to live out that great commission of just sharing the gospel, demonstrating the gospel with the world around us, that we're all missionaries. I believe we're all sent out, whether you're overseas or here locally, that you're called to be on mission at the school you go to or the workplace you are at and the neighborhood you live in. So we desire to equip our people to not just like, hey, come and hear Brad preach, but like, you need to learn how to preach. You need to learn how to proclaim the gospel as a missionary in your place. And then multiplication is just that desire to not, kind of at odds with addition. We're not just trying to add people to a Sunday gathering. We're trying to multiply disciples. We're trying to multiply leaders. We're trying to multiply churches. And so, our end game isn't to get big. It's to spread big. Like we want to plant as many churches as we can. But in order to plant healthy churches, you have to multiply leaders. And so that's the joy of a church planting culture, is there's always room for more leaders. You don't get to a spot and like the org chart's full and you're like, well, I guess you got to stick around for 15 years and we'll see what happens. It's like, you want to lead? Go plant a church. Let's go. We're behind you. Let's send you out. And so that's fun. And then the last one's just renewal, that we really believe that Jesus is making all things new, and we want to partner with him in that work of mercy and justice here in our community and overseas. And so, we have a mercy and justice team that really works hard on just showing the world what Jesus looks like in his care and his compassion and his generosity. And that's our desire to seeing all of life, our work life, our school life, and all of it to be a space of renewal for the sake of Jesus' name. So those are our 6 values, and maybe there's a few others in between, but those are the main things.
Nice. I love it. Do you guys put any effort, resources, money into marketing of any kind, or is it pretty much just all word of mouth and expecting your congregation to be sharing their experience, going to your church and really their relationships with God ultimately?
Yeah. We haven't done any marketing really that I can think of. Every once in a while we'll print flyers and hand them to people and be like, "Hey, pass these out to your friends." But we haven't done that in a long time.
Yeah.
I think it is. It's just word of mouth. It's just technically now we're on YouTube with COVID. That was something I never thought we would do. And then COVID hit, and it was like, well, I guess that's how this is going to go. So, so I guess you could say YouTube is its own marketing, but we're not like paying to like get the word out. I think that comes back to our value of family. Like we're not trying to make this thing big for the sake of it. We want it to be healthy mission wise and people to be reaching other people and sharing the gospel. But I still wrestle with that. I don't think that we have that figured out well. I see some churches doing just an incredible job of like building a platform and getting the name out. You're like, man, okay, like that. So I think I still wrestle with that at times. I think I lean more on the side of if Jesus wants my voice to be heard by millions, he's going to do that. I don't need to pay for that. You look back in church, you look back in church history, man, the voices Jesus wanted to have amplified, he seemed to be doing that without a marketing team. But I think there can be a time and a place for it. And, my wife even disagrees with my thoughts on that sometimes. So it's not I don't have a ton of verses to back that up. It's just more of probably just a personal conviction and my own thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really curious to hear, this is something I like to ask of all pastors, is how do you balance catering to the newcomer, the person who's just walked in for the very first time, maybe doesn't even know anything about the Bible or about Jesus, and feeding the consistent attender, the person that's been coming for a long time and needs that, meat versus milk that Paul talks about. How do you balance those two things in your sermons and in the way you construct your services and just everything that you do?
Yeah, we definitely don't do that great, I would say. I think we're still learning. I mean, it's funny. There's always stories that you could tell of like, look, it worked this way because of this one person, But I don't know. There's for every one story like that, there's several of the opposite. And so I think I do emphasize that the Sunday gathering is for the church. It's for Christians primarily. I'm not there to primarily reach non-Christians on a Sunday. And yet at the same time, I speak to non-Christians every single Sunday. We have tons of non-Christians that, are joining us. And so I think that Tim Keller, who was a pastor in Manhattan, was pretty influential on me in just understanding how that kind of preaching to both of those groups goes. And I think he's right. He just talks about preaching to the heart. Like if we can preach the gospel to the heart, like the depths of the heart, it's going to apply to everybody, And so I think that's something I strive for. Some Sundays better than others, but when I'm trying to constantly share my own personal sin on Sundays. Pretty much every Sunday, there's a moment where I'm just confessing my sin, and that is rarely like viewed as a weird thing. When you confess your own sin, and not like, I was out at the club last night, it's more like the envy in my heart and the greed in my heart and the anger in my heart and the lust and the pride, those kinds of things. Like that resonates with everyone, like that's something that just everyone can grasp. And I don't just leave it out there with like, and that's just, I'm a sinner, I'm generally also modeling to the church how I repent. So I think the church oftentimes is told, you need to repent, but they have no idea how to do it because it's never been modeled for them. And so part of my job as a preacher and a leader is to, one, share my sin in such a way that they can identify with, whether or not that's specifically their struggle. They know what sin is like. And then I'm also showing them out of it. When I talk about, my wife and I, we got into an argument. I don't end it with like, and then I was just mad. It's like, no, that was part of it.
Right.
But let me explain to you how we actually reconciled. We have tons of, every marriage argues, but not every marriage reconciles. Not every couple knows about how to repent and actually apologize and seek reconciliation, because out of a deep love for one another, out of what Christ has done for them. And so that kind of stuff, I think, just always, a non-Christian hearing a preacher confess sin is like,
yeah.
I mean, it shouldn't be this no duh, but they're usually almost any Sunday a new non-Christian or new person comes and they talk to me. They're like, I can't believe how honest you were. I'm like, really? Like all it took was me to say like me and my wife got into a little argument, or that I was envious of someone. Like that's really sad to me that was like, whoa, the first time they ever heard a leader like confess sin. It's like, man, that's devastating. And so, so it doesn't take much, but at the same time, I'd say this is where we don't have this figured out. And I wouldn't say we're, a funny story recently was actually a couple had shown back up to the church. I think it was right before COVID had hit. And they said, do you remember us? And I was like, no, I don't remember you. They're like, we actually showed up last year. And it was the Sunday it was like at the end of 2018. We did a 12-week series through the entire Bible, where we encouraged the entire church to read from Genesis to Revelation in 13 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so and for 13 Sundays, I preached the story of redemption. They showed up like a year after that, and they were like, we actually came that first Sunday where you guys started that Bible series, and we walked out and said, we're never coming back to that church. Because it was just too much, and then they came back after a while, and now they're a part of our church, and it's something we joke about now, but it's like, I wasn't thinking of the new person when I was like, hey guys, we're going to read, an hour of the Bible every day for the next 12 weeks, and I'm not like, oh man, that was a blind spot. It's just kind of like, no, I see my job primarily as to equip the church and to shepherd the church. I mean, there were non-Christians who actually ended up reading the Bible, better than Christians, so that stuff, there's going to be those stories, but also the stories of people showing up and going, this just is not the place for me. And we can't, I just can't do that. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So you have spent extended time in 3 pretty starkly different kinds of church, like ways of doing church. And so I'm curious to hear, at this point in your life, do you have any really strong convictions about how church should be done, what it should look like, allowing obviously for maybe nuance for people to kind of interpret things different ways, but personally, like in all your experience, like what do you feel is kind of the way church should be done?
Oh man. Yeah. I definitely have strong opinions. I also, I do believe, I think early on it was very easy for me to be the guy who was like, all right, we're doing this right. And not because we like stumbled upon this thing, but really there were other churches that we looked up to and had modeled it so beautifully for us when we were planting. And so, I think that the longer I've been following Jesus and pastoring, the more I do see, and this is something, again, Tim Keller is really helpful on, of just like that there are different ways that Jesus works in different people. And so for anyone to be anti the mega church 100%, I think it's wrong. And for anyone to be anti small churches, just for the sake of it, 100% is wrong. It's like, I know some people that would never step foot into a mega church because of just the bigness of it, just what it represents to a non-Christian world. And yet I know that there's people who would never step foot into what we're doing at a public school in an auditorium. I mean, like people think it's a cult, and there's people who actually will show up. They don't want to come to a smaller church like ours, where you're really going to get known. Like it's hard for you to show up on one of our Sundays and not meet someone, get invited to a lunch, something like that. So there's a lot of people who that's not what they are looking for. They're terrified of that. I have a family member who actually got saved in a mega church, and it took her about 1.5 years. And she says she sat in the back row. She walked in late, walked out early. She wanted to meet no one. She was going through a gnarly season of her life. And it was the preaching through a pastor at a mega church that she came to know Jesus. And so she would have never gotten saved in a church like ours. She didn't want to meet people. Now she is a part of our church, and now her story is such a beautiful picture of the diversity of God's kingdom, that we need each other. We need big churches. We need small churches. We need churches of all types. And so with that caveat, I obviously have strong opinions of just the way that church should be viewed as a family primarily, not as a business, and just the way leaders should really be vetted relationally rather than giftings wise, so there's about a million things I could get into if there were specific thoughts, but I definitely I love. But the piece of leading a church is, every once in a while, not every once in a while, quite often someone will be like, I don't like this about Restored. I'm like, me neither. It's like, just, you forget that, like, I'm the lead guy, but it's not like I look at this church and I'm like, oh, it's flawless. Man, there are plenty of things I would love to change that I can't change. And I think that the idealistic leader who views the church as like this perfect, beautiful thing where there's no one who sins and no one who, votes the wrong way and thinks the wrong thing. It's like, that just doesn't exist. Like, read the New Testament. The church is messy. And so I think our church is messy, man. It's not this perfect thing that we have a system and a structure to kind of make things roll really smoothly. It's relationships. Every family, every relationship has messiness to it, and so our church as well. And so that is always, and that you're going to find that in the big ones and the small ones, and all over the world.
Yeah, for sure. Will you elaborate just a little bit on the one thing you said about giftings, like vetting people relationally versus like what their spiritual giftings are? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, and I think that. I think that's one of the biggest problems with the evangelical Christian culture in the Western world in America. We care so much about gifting that we don't care much about character. We don't care much about somebody. When you look at the qualifications for an elder in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1, the vast majority of the qualifications are character. It's who you are. The only one is that, can you teach? And we take that one and we act like that's the only thing that actually matters. We don't care if you're how your marriage is. We don't care about your soul. We don't care about all those things. And so, I think that our church world is so quick to find the guy or gal who can speak well and put him up on a stage. And, the devastating news of Ravi Zacharias, where you got a very gifted man and nobody seems to care about him personally. Nobody seems to care. And obviously he was deceitful and really some wicked stuff. But it's almost like we act as if that was just like this isolated event. Like, whoa, we didn't see that one coming. It's like, how many guys do we have to see do the same exact thing over and over and over before we start going, this is a pattern. This is something built into the way we're structuring the celebrityism culture that we do. We just put people on stage. We don't care about them. We don't know about their wives. We don't know about anybody, their personal lives. And so for us as a church, like, we'll get people that come from another church and they're like, hey, I was a leader over here. Maybe I can lead a gospel community soon. It's like, no, we love you. You seem cool. You seem like you're gifted. But it's going to take a year for us to get to know you before you start getting an official title or a position of leadership. And so that's kind of one of the models of our church is we don't hire from outside. All of our staff members are raised up from within, that you can't kind of come from outside with a resume that tells us who you are. It's like, well, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just don't know. And shepherding is, man, that the hireling Jesus talks about runs away when the wolf comes. It's the shepherd who lays down his life for the people. And the hiring and firing culture of a lot of evangelical world is it's devastating. And I think it really continues to reveal its ugly head over and over with these moral failures that we keep acting shocked by, but we should stop being shocked by and really look at the foundation of why this keeps happening. And so, that's just a piece I'm decently passionate about.
For sure, yeah. Last thing I wanted to ask is, our culture, it feels like, is just changing at a breakneck speed right now, in the way it's evolving. And I don't think anyone would really say it's going down a good road. But I would just be curious to hear, like, when you look at our culture right now, like, what breaks your heart, and like, what change do you hope to see? And do you hope to kind of push forward when someone walks in to your church on a Sunday morning?
Yeah. It is, man. Culture it's a wild one, and it's hard to get an accurate understanding of exactly what's all going on. But what breaks my heart is I think the Christian church not looking the way she should. And I know she doesn't always, throughout history, there's always ugly things, but I think it breaks my heart that let's say specifically America. I think the American church's allegiance to the conservative and Republican Party with just kind of eyes closed is devastating to me. I think that a lot of the conservative Republican pro-Trumpism that's really in the American church is it's really devastating to me. I think it's not just like, oh, this is wrong. It's like, man, we're giving the world such a ugly picture of what Jesus is actually about. And so that's something I really, it makes me sad. It makes me really sad that the world thinks Jesus is like this because of the way the American church and Christians, are living. And so, so I'm passionate about, I'm not hopeless. I'm not like, oh man, we're all in trouble. I really believe that the local church is the hope of the world. Like, I believe that Jesus is on the throne, and that he has empowered the church with his Spirit, and that we will see beautiful times of revival and refreshment, and that will change culture. I really believe that. We're seeing, it's glimpses of it all over the world. But I do think that my heart just bleeds for just to see the scandalous and good news of what Jesus has done, his grace and his love. Like, I want that to be the message the world is actually rejecting, because they will reject. Some will reject. But right now the world seems to be rejecting just an ugly version of Christianity that I would reject as well. I think it's just so gross and truncated. And so, so I think a holier church would be beautiful. A church that takes sin seriously, yet at the same time proclaims the grace of Jesus, just scandalously. I think those two things go together, that those things shouldn't be pitted against one another, but that really grace leads to holiness. It leads to putting sin to death, because God's grace and his love, it's what satisfies us. It shows us that he is better than sin. He's better than all of these other things out there that the world is offering and saying that these things can save you. It's like, no, only Jesus can. And when you grasp that, when you get his loving pursuit of you, then you can say no to those things. And it isn't just like white knuckling, just, oh, it's the hardest thing ever, but I'll do it. It's like, man, he's better. He's just absolutely better than everything else. And so, man, I've got hope for our world, but only because of Jesus, not because of the current circumstances in our country.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love hearing your heart on that. I end each episode by asking for a recommendation of some kind, book, a podcast. It could even be a movie or a TV show. It doesn't have to be super serious. It can be on the fun side. So what do you got?
Oh, goodness. I do. I love this question, and I hate it so much. I love reading. I really do. Maybe less of a specific book. Just, I guess I would maybe say some favorite authors would be like the C.S. Lewis. Like, if anyone hasn't read C.S. Lewis out there, go stop listening to this. And C.S. Lewis, the Brendan Mannings, Tim Keller, N.T. Wright, Dallas Willard, Derwin Gray, like just some of the guys that I enjoy reading and listening to. But yeah, I'm a big book guy. I'm not going to do a good job giving any good recommendations on movies or shows. But yeah, those books are wonderful gifts.
I really should change this question to book recommendations because not one person has taken me up on the movie TV show recommendation request.
You know what? Okay, how about I'll do this? I just finished reading Harry Potter. So I know I'm late to the game on that, but I just read the whole Harry Potter series and absolutely loved it. So I haven't actually seen the movies yet, and I'm going to soon. So maybe that'll be like, and I've heard they're good. So I'll as a book/movie, Harry Potter, I'm as an adult male who just discovered these books. I'm pretty stoked on it.
I love that. Brad, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was an absolute delight talking to you. It just means the world to me that you would take the time to do this. So thank you.
Thank you, bro. I'm proud of you. Stoked for what you're up to and what God's doing through you. So thank you for having me, man. It was a privilege.
Sure thing.